Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Begin Center Zoom program for English speakers. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow here at the Begin Heritage Center in Jerusalem. It's my great pleasure to welcome what is, as always, an international audience. We have people here from Israel, the United States, Europe, South Africa, and I know many of you are regulars to these weekly sessions. Every week, I have a guest on from the world of politics or academia or journalism, in which we discuss either contemporary Israeli or Middle East or Jewish issues, or maybe take a little step back into history and discuss something that is of interest and relevance for us today. We are in the midst of a great series that we're doing now of discussions with former Israeli ambassadors. Those of you who've been following this will know that I've spoken to Mark Regev, former ambassador to the United Kingdom, and Matan Vilnai, former ambassador to China, in recent weeks. And today we have really, there's no other way of putting it, really, the big one, the most significant, consequential ambassadorial position that Israel has, the position in Washington, D.C., ambassador to the United States, and there's no way really to express fully, I think, the significance of this position and the significance and importance of the relationship between Israel and the United States in terms of defense policy, foreign policy, and just the shared interests and values between our two countries. And it's my great pleasure and privilege to have with me not just one of the great Israeli figures who's filled that position, but I think the only one who's written a book about his time in that position, Dr. Michael Oren. Before I introduce him, let me just briefly say how this is going to work for those of you who are new to this. I'm going to speak to our guest for about 30 minutes and then turn the floor over to you. You can write your questions into the chat at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can write them as we go, as they occur to you, and I promise I will get to them when I've finished my conversation with Ambassador Oren. Okay, so Michael Oren is an American-born Israeli historian, author, politician, former ambassador, of course, and former member of Knesset for the Kulanu party, a former deputy minister in the Prime Minister's office. He's written multiple books, articles, essays on Middle East history. He's the author of the aforementioned book about his time in office, Ally, My Journey Across the American-Israel Divide, a New York Times bestseller. Also Power, Faith and Fantasy, and of course, 6 Days of War. I think, in my opinion, the single best volume about the 6-Day War, which was also a History Book of the Year award from the LA Times and a National Jewish Book Award winner. He's also written several works of fiction, including his most recent novel, To All Who Call in Truth. Dr. Oren has taught at Harvard, Yale, and Georgetown universities in the US, and at Ben Gurion and Hebrew universities in Israel. He was a distinguished fellow at the Shalom Center in Jerusalem and a contributing editor to The New Republic. Dr. Oren, it's a great pleasure to have you with us.
Love to be with you, Paul. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Okay, so there's a lot I could talk about, of course, about your time, and we'll get to a bunch of the numerous, I guess, episodes, important and sometimes controversial even episodes that you were involved in as ambassador. But I remember when I read the book when it first came out, Ally, one of the things that struck me was not something about your time in office, but actually something that you wrote right at the beginning of the book about the sort of quite wrenching decision that you made in terms, well, the very, I guess, decision, Israeli patriotic decision to accept the Prime Minister's invitation to be his ambassador, but the wrenching decision that you to give up your American citizenship, which is what you had to do in order to fulfill the position. Can you tell us something about that? Because I know we have a lot of Americans on the call. Some of them have made Aliyah, some of them are still in the United States. But what was that like? That you describe it so vividly in the book of going, I think, to the American embassy and having to hand over your passport. What was that like?
It was gut-wrenching. It was. Listen, I grew up as a proud American. My father was a veteran of 2 wars. We always had an American flag outside our house. And I had a classic sort of American upbringing with, pep rallies and road rallies and junior proms and senior proms, something out of Happy Days for you Americans out there. And very much so, an Italian town too. And I love the United States. And I deeply felt that it was my American values which informed to a large extent my decision to make Aliyah to Israel, to be of service, I was a lone soldier in the paratrooper for many years, to that type of service, to work with refuseniks in the Soviet Union underground. That was all, much of it was informed by what I internalized as an American. I felt very strongly about it. And I was very proud to form that bridge culturally, historically, intellectually between Israeli and American culture. So for me to give up one half of it was very difficult. The ceremony itself was brutal, Paul. I mean, you go down into what was then the American embassy in Tel Aviv, and you stand before a flag, and a consular officer reads to you your forfeiture of rights. If you get in trouble in a foreign country, you or your children, we're not going to come rescue you anymore. And you raise your right hand and you take this oath that you know that you're renouncing these rights. And they take a very large stainless steel hole puncher and punch a hole in your passport right over the breast of the eagle. Okay. And and I had been working with the American Embassy for some time. And I knew these folks, and I sat there crying, and they all came over and gave me a big hug. They let you write a statement, and that statement I still have. Part of it is described in the book Ally, where I talk about the values that inspired me as a young person, that helped inform my decision to make Aliyah to Israel, and the career path of service that I chose was so much owed to my American background. I also said, last point is, you can punch a hole in my passport, but you can't make me less, forgive me, of a Patriots fan. You can't make me less of an American historian. I taught American history at those universities.
Right. No, as I said, it's extremely vivid in the book, and I if anyone hasn't read the book, they should read it. Not just that bit, but certainly that bit is extremely powerful. There's Dr. Oren, some people are saying that your sound isn't great. I don't know if you can adjust that in any way or get closer.
I don't know if I can. Let's see.
But I just for people out there, I recommend you turn up your volume as well. I mean, that's also
my volume is as high as it goes, Paul.
Okay. So
usually there's no problem. I can get a little closer to the computer if that's going to help, but I don't know.
Okay, yeah, maybe you could try that. But everyone, just turn up your volume as well, because I think we should all be able to do that, and it maybe put on headphones.
Well, let us know if you're still having difficulties. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, so you came into this job with such a wide range of knowledge, not only because you are American originally, but also you'd written about the relationship between the United States and the Middle East. I think Power, Faith, and Fantasy you wrote before you became ambassador. Mm-hmm. Another great book for anyone out there who wants to read a fantastic history of America's engagement in the Middle East. But I wonder whether, even with all that prior knowledge, whether you learned something new about the US-Israel relationship from being on the inside during your tenure that surprised you, that was just sort of like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. Is there something you can relate to in that?
Well, two things. I say one is good news and one is not such good news. Okay, so the good news was this, that the US-Israel relationship was far deeper and more multifaceted than even I had imagined before entering the job. And that was true on virtually every level. Certainly on the strategic level, Israel has the deepest and most multifaceted strategic alliance with the United States, which the United States has had with any foreign power in the post-World War II period. And I could probably spend 2 hours of our time just talking about that, whether it's joint maneuvers, particularly of special forces, it's systems development. An interesting factoid is that every American pilot, fighter pilot, helicopter pilot, wears an Israeli-made helmet. Every American naval destroyer carries an Israeli gun. It's cyber cooperation, it's intelligence cooperation at the highest level. It's extremely, extremely deep. And I had underestimated it. I had written about Power, Faith, and Fantasy, and I had written about the spiritual connection between the United States and Israel. And it's what truly makes U.S.'s relationships special, because America can have say a strategic relationship with France or a strategic relationship with Italy. It can have shared democratic values. But, millions of Americans don't go to a church every Sunday and read about God promising, Italy to the Italians or France to the French. Okay. It's a huge, if I say that the U.S.'s relations rests on three pillars, the defensive, the democratic, and the spiritual, I think that the biggest is the spiritual. And that was deeper than anything I had ever encountered. When I walk into an office of a congressman from West Texas who has his constituency, his area, his representative is bigger than 4 times the size of the state of Israel, probably doesn't have a Jew in it. And he's got the Bible opened up on his desk, and he points to Genesis and says, "You see where it says here that I will bless the people who bless my people? I believe that. How much do you need for Iron Dome?" Wow. Like, quote unquote. And I used to hear that so often. The first time I heard it, I was shocked. And then I got quite, I got rather benumbed to it, but I got too used to it. So that was the very good news, deeper and more multifaceted. The bad news, I had written this book called Power, Faith, and Fantasy, looking now over the course of U.S. history, going back in the Middle East, going back to 1776, and I had this thesis that it was always a blend of the projection of American power, the need to export American faith, Christian faith, but also democratic faith, and finally fantasy. And there was always this tension between the three, and often fantasy got the upper hand. It was during my period, however, beginning with the Obama years, that the power factor began to almost disappear as America became unable of projecting major power anywhere in the world, and particularly in the Middle East, because of the unsuccessful wars there, because of internal dissension with the United States, economic upheaval. So the power factor went out. Faith, earlier in the century, George Bush sent 600,000 U.S. troops into Iraq to bring democracy into the Middle East. Such a thing would be unthinkable today. I'm not sure you'd have a majority of Americans willing to sacrifice to bring their ideals to other areas of the world, into the Middle East in particular. And yet this has been a constant theme in American foreign policy going back to the 18th century. This began to disappear. So what was left was the fantasy. It was the fantasy that the Arab Spring would produce a string of democracies across the Middle East, a fantasy that the Palestinian Authority under Mahmoud Abbas actually wanted a two-state solution. Fantasy after fantasy. I mean, I can't tell you all the different American policymakers who during my period were convinced that Bashar al-Assad was a peacemaker. So that it was just one fantasy after another. And I tell you the truth, I'd probably have trouble writing that book today. I could probably write it as a history book, but I wouldn't. The title would have to change, because the subtitle is America's Involvement in the Middle East from 1776 to the present. But I'm uncertain whether faith and power remain major characteristics of America's involvement in the Middle East today.
Right. That's really fascinating. And I think for all their multiple differences, it, in a weird way, it's something which is sort of carried over to like Obama, Trump, and Biden, I think.
Unquestionably. These two gentlemen have absolutely nothing in common except for one thing, and that is isolationism.
Right. For different reasons, I think. And
I don't know, I think it's essential that Americans, it's overwhelmingly bipartisan. It's probably one of the few bipartisan issues in Washington today, is the tremendous resistance to getting involved in further overseas entanglements. And something that Washington actually warned about back in the 1790s. But, I think that we now see President Biden trying to, and forgive me for using this word, trying to claw America's way out of it and get back into the world in some way. And we're seeing how difficult it is, because it's very difficult for America to play a substantive diplomatic role if your diplomacy is not backed up by force. You can't be asserting yourself diplomatically and withdrawing from Afghanistan the way you do. Right. It just doesn't work in the world.
Right. So we're definitely going to get into some of the specifics of your time, but I do want to ask also one more general question, which is, so when I read about different Israeli ambassadors to Washington, or I hear them being interviewed, I'm often struck there are different ways of doing the job. Different ambassadors come with different priorities, obviously their own personal characteristics, because there are so many facets to it. There's the relationship with the White House or with Congress, which might be in the hands of a different party to the White House, and then there's all the different communities, not least of which, of course, is American Jewry, which is which is something which makes this job distinct from all the other Israeli ambassadorial jobs because of the size and influence of the American Jewish population. So how did you, when you went into the job, did you have in mind a sense of how you were going to play it, what you were going to focus on, the areas you were going to focus on when you started?
You couldn't be more right. Every ambassador has to choose her or his agenda. They have to think, what kind of ambassador am I and who am I representing? Now, I was never been a member of the Likud. I knew Benjamin Netanyahu socially, a little bit academically. I was not close to him politically. And that would be known in Washington. I knew that in order to gain influence in Washington, there was only one way, and that was through media. And I had an extensive media presence. So I had been the Middle East analyst for CNN, the Middle East analyst for CBS. So that was a very big asset for me. But that's not the way I conceived of my position. I did not see my position as being Israel's Netanyahu's ambassador to Obama, or even the Israeli government's ambassador to the American government exclusively. Of course, I was those roles as well. I was principally the ambassador of the state of Israel and the people of Israel to the people of the United States.
Wow.
Which, and I'm very consciously about this. And so what does this mean? Well, for example, drawing on my father's military background, the fact that I grew up a lot of bases, I reached out to the American military. I went to all the academies. I went to major military bases from Guantanamo to the war academies. Wherever I went, always Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, on a small plane to meet with the American military. It meant reaching out to the American Jewish communities, because there are a great many of them, including some that were very, very problematic for us, highly critical of us. But moreover, reaching out to different ethnic and religious groups. Almost every other Sunday would find me in a church of one stripe or another, particularly African-American churches. I put a tremendous emphasis on that. And I instituted a number of social events. Now, your social event for an ambassador can be a great tool. So I did a number of events. My first event was the Irish Israel night, where I brought in a fabulous Irish band from Israel. I also play Irish music, so I got to play along with them. It was terrific. And we invited all prominent Irish Americans to a kosher Irish meal of corned beef and great whiskey. And then we did a Greek night, and then we did actually an Arab night, which was interesting. We did an Iranian night with Iranian Americans who weren't Jewish, Muslims. The event I am proudest of, and which I asked my successor to continue, was the one event, was the iftar. Now, the iftar, for those of you who don't know, is the break fast for Ramadan. There was an iftar at the White House instituted by George Bush. There was an iftar at the French and British embassies. We have a higher percentage of Muslims in our population. Why didn't we have an iftar? Now, you should have seen the faces of my security people, Paul, when I told them I wanted to invite 80 Muslims into the embassy. That was crazy. And finally, I got all the permissions. And then the question was, who's going to come? And I had a great ally and friend in Abdullah Tebli, the Imam of Duke, a tremendously brave and a visionary, and a dear friend. And he helped me with the first year we had 60. The next year we did the iftar, there was a waiting list to get in. And it's become one of the most popular events in Washington, the Israeli iftar. Everyone wants to be seen there. And I'm enormously proud of it. I am. I think this is part of the job of the ambassador, is to reach out. Last thought about this: they'll hear many arguments that the role of ambassadors become antiquated. That it was important back, in the Middle Ages, when the ambassador would hang out in court and listen to gossip and send a letter that would get back to his king, 3-4 months later, at which point everyone's dead. What does it mean today, when a prime minister can pick up the phone to the president, or any minister can pick up the phone to their counterparts? What does it mean? And the argument is exactly wrong. That today, the tools at an ambassador's disposal, whether it be regular media, social media, reaching out to campuses. I went to 1-2 campuses every month, and that wasn't easy. You have this entire spectrum of tools, this arsenal, if you will, that can make you very effective, if used properly, in getting your message across.
Well, thank you very much. That's fantastic. I think that's a really eye-opening answer to that question. So obviously the big story, in a way, about your time in office was that you were there during this, let's say, sometimes fractious relationship between an American administration and an Israeli government, Barack Obama and Benjamin Netanyahu. And Obama is, I think, regarded by, I don't want to generalize, but I would say by many Israelis as, at best, an ambivalent president towards Israel, and at worst, actively anti-Israel. That's not my opinion, but I know there are people who say that. What's your assessment of him and his administration in terms of, I'm thinking particularly because you know better than I do everything that's said about that administration, and I guess particularly in light of the administration that came after it. But how do you assess it now, looking back?
Well, I can talk about things that are not in the book, the Ally book, and how controversial it was back then. Imagine now. Right. Let me say at the outset that I both like and greatly admired President Obama. I liked him on a personal level. He was an extraordinary individual, brilliant, comfortable in his body. He moved like a dancer, articulate. But he did not belong to that generation that remembered the 6-Day War. Certainly not the Holocaust. Right. He had not grown up among Jews. I mean, compared to Joe Biden, who not only remembers the 6-Day War and the Holocaust, but his closest friends growing up were Jews. Right. And so Israel is deeply ingrained in his soul. That's like it's not even his heart; it's in his soul. And I know Joe Biden very well. He was my major point of contact in the administration. I think that Obama came into office influenced by a number of factors, particularly ideas that have been regnant on American campuses for a long time. There's a chapter in the Ally book where I talk about Obama 101, where I actually go back and look at all his speeches and every interview he ever gave. That was a controversial point, and reached some controversial conclusions that happened to enable me to predict what he was going to do with almost 100% certainty, because I understood his worldview. In that worldview was a desire to normalize the relationship with the state of Israel. We talked about Israel having a special relationship. Obama wanted to take it down a number of notches. One of the measures he adopted from the very beginning was that the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, would not interact personally with me and with the embassy, which was a radical departure from previous policies. My predecessor in office used to call the Secretary of State all the time. I could not. The only person who wouldn't go along with this, by the way, was Joe Biden. And that's how I came to know him so well. He wouldn't cooperate with that, the icing out of the Israeli embassy. But there were many things. And then, in addition to that, you have the how should I say, mercurial / combustive relationship between the prime minister and the president. And I think you could not have two individuals who could be more, I would say, almost chemically unsuitable to one another. Amazing in their worldviews and their personalities, and also the fact that they both thought they were the smartest people in the room, which is usually the case. They were the smartest.
Usually the case, right?
They're both in the same room,
right.
It was that kind of clash. I had to deal with the charges that Obama was anti-Semitic. He was not, or that he was anti-Israel. He just had a different idea of Israel. And I'll end with a story, which, as history would have it, was my last day on the job. My last day on the job. I happened to be in the Oval Office with Netanyahu. And the president said something which stuck with me. And it was like an aha moment. Now I get it. After 5 years, I finally fully get it. Was this. And I'm almost quoting the president word for word. He says, if Israel ever got into a war, of course, America would come to Israel's aid, because that's what the American people expect. Not what I would do. But that's what the American people would expect. And I thought that was very revealing. Yeah.
I mean, it's also, from my perspective as an Israeli, it's also positive to hear that that's what the American people expect. I mean, the president sees that even a president who had his own reservations about it, seemed to recognize that.
Yeah, the big question is whether, 10 years later, that's still true.
Right. Indeed. Okay, so I was actually going to ask about a follow-up about Joe Biden, which you answered somewhat, but obviously he's now the president. And again, I think that because we had this interregnum of Trump, who was, let's not get into all the controversy, but different in a million ways from anything that had come before in all kinds.
Except on the isolationism, yeah.
Right. But also did things that Israel wanted, that no other president had done. The embassy recognized the Golan, all these things. And, Biden is more, I guess, more of a traditional pre-Trump president. But as you said, he's not Obama. And I think that's maybe interesting too.
But he is a Democrat.
Right. And what does that, so what does that mean now? What does that mean now that he's a Democrat?
What does it mean? It means that on two issues, we are going to be at loggerheads. There's going to be the peace issue, and perhaps the differences are less between our current prime minister and the current president than it would have been under a previous prime minister, perhaps less.
Right.
And there's also differences of tone. But this administration knows that there's no chance whatsoever for moving forward, that Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, cannot even stand for re-election, much less negotiate and sign a peace agreement. We don't have a stable government right now. We're always in really these constant election cycles. So there's no chance of moving forward. President Biden and his team look back over the past 20 years at least and see president after president, right, Republican and Democratic, like investing vast amounts of energy and time to move the Palestinian-Israeli needle forward, and everybody failed. But everybody failed. Nothing gets moved. Right. And they're not about to do this. There are more important issues in the world, to say the least, now that the war in Ukraine. Right. You got to start sending the Secretary of State back and forth for a useless negotiation and shuttle diplomacy. They're not going to do that. So that's just on that issue. Then there's the Iranian issue. Now, this is an administration that ran in the election with a promise to renew the 2015 JCPOA. It has worked robustly to try to achieve that, has not achieved it, probably because of Iranian intransigence than American reluctance. And I sincerely believe that there is still a decent chance, decent if not better chance, that this administration will renew the JCPOA. This administration, in certain ways, is actually less militant than the Obama administration was. The Obama administration would say again and again, we have all options on the table, including a military option, and we're preparing that military option. This administration has never said that, with the one exception of when the president interviewed with Yonit Levy on Israeli television. She asked him, would you use military force in the final analysis? He said yes, but my sources tell me that was off script. So I wouldn't actually read too deeply into that. I'm not considering a military option. And
it's like his comment about regime change in Russia, maybe.
It's whatever. I tell you the truth, I'll explain it to you later, but it's actually irrelevant. I'll explain it to you later. It's irrelevant. We get into the technical, the deep dirt of the Iranian nuclear issue. But Biden is not Obama 2.0. He comes from a completely different worldview. He comes from a place of deep love for Israel and the Jewish people. Doesn't mean we're not going to have differences. And in the case of Iran, I think a very substantive difference. But I think that has less to do almost with the Biden administration than it does with American national interests. And I'll explain that too as well.
Okay. All right. So let's say a little bit about, let's ask a little bit about that, the Iranian issue, because obviously that was something that was already a major issue during your period. You were no longer ambassador when Netanyahu gave his famous speech in Congress, but you were there, I guess, for a lot of the build-up to that, to the diverging opinions between Washington and Israel. I think you were ambassador, I believe, during the period when there was the potential, the question of an Israeli strike, right? There was discussion that Netanyahu and his defense minister, Ehud Barak, were looking to strike. What was going on at that time? Were Washington freaking out about it? What was happening?
I think that's an understatement, freaking out. And it was a fear that Israel would drag America into war, that Israel would undermine Obama's Iran policy. By the way, he embarked on that Iran policy in the first week in the Oval Office, first week in the White House. In 2009, he wrote a letter to the Supreme Leader. So it was a core policy that we threatened, that Israel would interfere with the elections of 2012, make Obama look weak and get Mitt Romney elected president. It was all there at the same time.
Wow.
There was I think a lack of information, of estimation about the degree of opposition to such a strike on the part of the Israeli defense community, whether the head of the Mossad, the chief of staff, everyone seemed to be against that strike. History will have to write this, Paul, whether we missed a great opportunity there, whether it was what they call in Hebrew, achmatzah. Right. I tend to believe there was. That's
wow.
Me. I didn't believe there was, but for many deep and strategic reasons. And again, I keep on delaying this. I'll explain this all later. You know, there was an old joke about Lyndon Johnson giving a speech. And he used to get the cue cards. And he says, "Well, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow Americans, I'm going to tell you how I'm going to end the Vietnam War. Just hold on 1 second." And then you go to the next card. And, fellow Americans, I'm going to tell you how I'm going to end poverty in the United States. And Americans, I'm going to tell you how I'm going to win the war against drugs. And then he gets to the last card. It says, "Well, now, Mr. President, you're on your own." So here I am, telling you how I'm going to tell you why there's differences with the United States and why I felt that we might have missed an opportunity in 2012. But I often tend to take controversial policies. What can I say? I also opposed Bibi's speech in the UN in 2015. I was already in Knesset at that point, and I don't think he ever quite forgave me for it. But my feeling was that it lost us votes rather than got us votes, and cost us a tremendous amount of support in the Democratic Party, to which we are still trying to deal with today. On the other hand, the speech, frankly, also enabled the Republicans to formulate a very powerful anti-JCPOA policy and led to President Trump's withdrawal from the JCPOA in 2018, which I think was actually a historic achievement. We'll have to see how it plays out. Anyway, so let's, your question was, again, I've gotten off of the track here, telling jokes.
Yeah, that's fine. No, it was basically about you answered it somewhat. What was going on at that time in Washington in terms of the reaction to the possibility of an Israeli attack, but also more broadly, how did you perceive the growing divergence of opinions between Washington and Jerusalem on this issue?
Well, the divergent opinion were not public. I participated in nearly 5 years of the highest level, most classified discussions between our senior officials and their senior officials. And we looked at the same information. We had no disagreements about the nature of the Iranian program, how long it would take them to break out and create a bomb if they wanted to. Notice what we did was have deep philosophical agreements. Our American counterparts sincerely believe that if Iran was treated with respect and with financial inducements, that Iran could become a quote unquote responsible regional power, that you could help resolve the Shiite-Sunni divide. Our people looked at their people, what can I say, like they were crazy. And that if you give Iran $100 billion, they're not going to build schools and hospitals, they're going to spend it on missiles, they're going to take over, they're going to undermine further American governments, the American governments in the Middle East, they're going to spend it on terror. Guess who was right? We were unfortunately 100% right. The other notions that somehow Iran was not going to be building its advanced centrifuges, was not going to build an intercontinental ballistic system, was not working clandestinely on a warhead. They didn't accept any of this.
Right.
And we were insistent on it. And again, what can I say? Unfortunately, we were right. What's interesting is that today, nobody in the Biden administration believes this. Nobody believes that Iran is going to become a responsible regional power. That's gone, completely gone. Nobody says what Obama said and his people said, sort of ad infinitum, which was that the Iran nuclear deal blocked Iran's passage to the bomb. Nobody believes that today. They know that at most it will delay Iran's progress toward the bomb. At most, even Secretary of State Blinken says that. No one says that anymore. So why are they doing it? They're doing it because they want to kick the can down the road. And that was the third reason that the Obama administration wanted to do this, because America at that time was getting out of Iraq, was getting out of Syria, was in the process of beginning to withdraw from Afghanistan. The last thing they wanted to do was get into another Middle Eastern war. Right. And here I want to explain what I said before. It has to do with interests, not just with personalities. I'm going to say the obvious. So forgive me for waxing tautological. And it's this: America's a big country. It's far away from the Middle East. It is not threatened with national annihilation by the Iranians. We are a small country. We are in Iran's backyard, and we are threatened with genocide. And given our history, given our status, we have no choice but to take the Iranian nuclear threat with supreme seriousness. And our margin for error is exactly zero. So while President Biden and his predecessors, I must say, can promise from here to eternity that America will never let Iran get a nuclear weapon, at the end of the day, it's irrelevant for us, because our problem is not with Iran's achieving nuclear capability. It's our problem is with Iran achieving the ability to make a nuclear bomb, which is called threshold capacity.
Right.
Because once Iran has that capacity, our ability to defend ourselves against Hezbollah, against Hamas, goes down. I don't want to say to zero, but it plummets. And the best example you're going to have is in Ukraine right now, because Russia invades and Putin declares a nuclear alert. And guess what? Nobody intervenes.
Right.
Nobody. You don't. The United States won't even let the Poles provide jet planes to the Ukrainians. Everyone's afraid. So what happens if Hezbollah starts firing 100,000 rockets at us, and we have to move our army into southern Lebanon? Iran declares a nuclear alert. And if they're a day away from making a bomb, which is what threshold capacity is, how do we defend ourselves?
Yeah.
There is a difference between us. And this is not, it's not a matter of personality. It's a matter of fundamental divergence of interest between us.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. So one more question from me, and then I'll turn over to the questions from the audience. And please, guys, keep writing those questions in. So I want to end my questions on a sort of more positive note. So with all the well-known, well-documented, not least by you, tensions and issues that came up in your period in office, and the relationship, as you said, between the two principles, there were also plenty of examples in your time of that continuing and consistent strength and closeness of the relationship between the two countries. Can you mention a couple of those? Because I remember from the book there were I think one that stuck with me. Maybe you could say a little bit about was the when there were the fires.
And the Carmel fire, yeah. It was actually Hanukkah night, the night of the Hanukkah party at the White House, December 1st, and I was walking into the White House and I got a call from the Prime Minister, and I actually never heard him use that voice. And he said that the fire was descending on Haifa, and right now we'd exhausted all of our ability to stop it. And I was to go immediately to meet the president and ask for urgent assistance. So I went through the Hanukkah party, found the president, called me into a back room, and he's with his assistant, Reggie Love, basketball player, great guy. And I told him, I reported on what the president had asked me to say. The president turned to Reggie Love and said, get Israel whatever it needs right now. And I proceeded from the Hanukkah party to the NSA, where we sat all night long and worked on how to get special paratroop units, these hot spotters they were called, how to get extinguishing panes, how to scrub all the warehouses of NATO for retardant. And we did it. It was amazing. It was amazing. So I get the chills even while talking about it today. I get the chills talking about it. So you can't say Obama's anti-Israel. He understood.
Right.
And, it's true he didn't want a special relationship, but we were still an allied country. We were a country of human beings. And he understood that. So there were many, many examples like that. And keep in mind, the United States is not just the White House. The United States is the Congress. The United States is local, state governments. It's the U.S. military.
Right.
And you had to be in my shoes when the son of a career officer who had landed on Normandy Beach, walks into the mess hall at West Point, and 5,000 cadets stand up, and salute me at attention. Because I'm not me, because I'm the representative of the state of Israel. By the way, the same thing happened in Annapolis.
Wow.
The same thing happened at the Marine base.
Wow.
And then you realize just how deep this relationship really is.
That's really something. That's really something. Again, I can't recommend highly enough Ambassador Oren's book for those that want to get more into these details. But let's get to some questions. So there were a couple of questions on a similar theme. Sveberg and Lauren Blatt both asked about the Svi asked about the leftist elements in the Democratic Party, and Lauren Blatt referred to the squad. To what extent do you think they represent the future of the Democratic Party, and are they currently a particularly powerful presence in the party, in your view?
They are currently a powerful presence. They're not a supremely powerful presence. They're about somewhat less than 60 sort of extreme progressives. They're about 100 progressives. There are 435 members of Congress. So you can do the math. And some of the progressives, like Congressman Torres from New York, are very pro-Israel. So being progressive doesn't necessarily mean you're anti-Israel.
Right, he's great.
I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything. I think we have a deep problem in the Democratic Party. I think our problems in America are, in some cases, subliminally deep. That it's not about, for so many, especially the young people and liberals, it's not about what we do anymore, but who we are. It's not about 67. It's not about Judea and Samaria and Gaza anymore, or even Jerusalem. It's about 48. It's about our existence. We were somehow created in sin. So everything we do, including everything good we do, is essentially designed to cover up some type of evil, like pink washing or rescue washing. And I see this permeating the American press, again, at a very profoundly deep level. I have an article coming out in Mosaic magazine this week about the Abu Akla affair, which I think is in many ways a turning point. I've never seen anything like it. And you want me to go into this? You're looking like
I mean, I don't want to stop to sort of prevent people from reading the article, but maybe just a summing up of
one word is that since 1990 there have been 2,700 war correspondents killed in action. Okay, there's only been one war correspondent who's been the focus of extensive front page investigations by the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, and 2 other major agencies. That has been the focus of acts of Congress and the Senate, repeated statements by the administration. Okay? The belief, the narrative, the blood libel that Israel targets journalists intentionally. And Abu Akla is only one of the journalists we've targeted intentionally. By the way, it's a total lie. Fewer journalists have been killed covering the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the last 30 years that have been killed in Ukraine in the last 5 months.
Wow.
And, you want to be cynical and say, geez, if Israeli soldiers wanted to shoot journalists who are standing and just open marked with press, they could probably do that if they were so ordered. But think about this. The fact that people believe that our soldiers are doing this anyway, even though by killing journalists, we're not suppressing free speech, we're not suppressing criticism of Israel, we're increasing criticism of Israel manifoldly, then the only reason we're doing this is because we're fundamentally evil. We're demons. And that's where the true criminalization of Israel is happening. It's happening in organizations like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, where they're saying it's not about 67. It's about the fact that Israel itself was created as an act of ethnic cleansing and apartheid and genocide. And that is percolating not just through the Democratic Party, it's percolating through the media. And certainly it's percolated for a long time to the campuses. We have to be humble about this, Paul. America is in the throes, and I stress the word throes, of processes over which we have no control. We didn't invent wokeism. We didn't invent intersectionality or the cancel culture. And yet we're on the receiving end of so much of this.
Right.
And so our ability to impact it is limited. I'll say something that maybe some of your listeners will disagree with that. We could create a Palestinian state tomorrow. We could pull back the 67 borders and redivide Jerusalem. At the end of the day, I don't know if it would make much of a difference. Because it's not about who we are. It's not about what we do. It's about who we are. And that's where the prison. That to me is a much more deeply rooted malady. It's just the only way I can say it. It's a kind of sickness that is permeating America. And it's not just the Democratic Party.
Right. Okay. No, thank you. Thank you very much for that. Okay. Question here from Robin, so Robin actually asks, would you have wanted to be ambassador at the time of the Abraham Accords? But maybe I could, with her permission, I'll just expand on that and just ask for your general learned opinion on the Abraham Accords and what they could portend.
The Abraham Accords were a total game changer. They utterly upended every assumption about peacemaking in the Middle East. Somehow you had to create a Palestinian state first. Israel had to give up territory, had to redivide Jerusalem, had to uproot, tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of our citizens from Judea and Samaria. Totally upended. It even upended the paradigm of the Egyptian and Jordanian peace agreements, which were predicated on the belief that first you had made peace with the government, and then somehow that would seep down into the people and get normalization. We have normalization first with the Abraham Accord countries, and then we get peace with the governments. Completely, everything was just the reverse. Throw it out the window. And that narrative was held by a vastly powerful peace industry, which was think tanks and universities and the media. Powerful. In one fell swoop, gone. Game changer. And we have to do everything to preserve it. Again, I can be political now because I'm not an ambassador. If we have a very right-wing government as our next government, that is probably the only thing that can jeopardize these accords.
Why? Because they push annexation?
Annexation, issues related to the holy places. Yeah, that's what can do it. I don't think a war with Gaza could do it, but this could do it.
Right.
I not to blow my own horn, I couldn't write about it very much in Ally, but of course the relationship with the Gulf countries goes way back, and the people who did not get great credit to the Abraham Accords were the Israeli diplomats who worked undercover with for decades, long time. And I know some of these individuals, and they were selfless and did an extraordinary job.
Wow.
I would meet regularly with my UA colleague, with my Bahraini colleague, with a number of Arab ambassadors, and we were laying the groundwork for what became the Abraham Accords. Would I like to have been, have been there to see that finalized? I guess yes, but I think looking back, and I say this again with humility. At the end of Ally, there's a line which is probably my favorite that I ever wrote, which is that the history is humbling, because it transforms the events that we view as mountainous into something like molehills. And people don't even remember half the things that went on during the Obama administration. So I think everyone would love to be present at that, but I think I was present dealing with some very severe molehills. And I kind of think I was the right guy at the right time. You see all that white hair I have up there? That's where it comes from.
Okay, so there's a question here from David Reese asks, how do you think Obama's background, including his friendship with Rashid Khalidi, affected his views of Middle East peace? So for those that don't know, Rashid Khalidi is
I'll direct you to that chapter in the book called Obama 101.
Okay.
Where I examine all this and examine deeper. Part of Obama's childhood was spent as a Muslim in Muslim countries, and when he was first elected, he would always talk about his Muslim families. He used to use his full name back then. It changed from about a year into his presidency. Would always talk about his Muslim. You got to remember that his first major international speech at becoming president is in Cairo.
Cairo, right.
And that speech was 3 times as long as his inaugural address. And his staff said he'd been working on that speech for months and months. And it opens up with the line saying, "I've known Islam on 3 continents." And people forget this. Among the efforts that one of the steps that Obama took to take down the special relationship was to eliminate 2 pillars in that relationship. One was no daylight, and the other was no surprises. So for many, many years, the assumption was that we could have disagreements with the United States, but that we should keep them behind closed doors so that our mutual enemies could not enjoy them. One of the worst crises we ever had in U.S.'s relationship was over the sale of Israeli weapons to China during the Bush administration. Right. This was an underground earthquake that almost broke the relationship, but nobody even heard about it. And many of your listeners won't even know about it today. But every minor controversy we had with the Obama administration immediately made the press, to the point where there was a couple of houses being built in Gilo, and the president stopped his first state visit to China to give a press conference to condemn us for the building in Gilo. Can you imagine that? Okay, right. That's what we're dealing with.
Right.
The second principle was no surprises. So whenever there was a major American statement on the Middle East that impacted our security, our interests, the United States would always give us advance copies. Back in 2002, when Bush gave the roadmap, for example, Arik Sharon got a copy of that 2 weeks before the speech was given. Not only did we not get any warning, any foreknowledge of any speech that the president made on the Middle East, to the degree that we were informed at all, we were misinformed.
Wow.
In some cases, I can only conclude deliberately. So here we were sitting, I was sitting in the Kiryat at the time, listening to Obama's speech in Cairo with a number of high-ranking Israeli officers. And everyone's sitting there going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. We had no knowledge of the speech. Can you imagine this? What a departure that was.
Wow.
This is, not that long ago. I was the only Israeli member of President Bush's delegation in 2008 to Israel. And I'll never forget standing next to Bush as he declared, America is not a nation of 300 million, we're a nation of 308 million, all right? And can you imagine Obama saying something like that? And this was a difference of what, 7-8 months?
Right.
And what a difference! What a profound, size. And so I don't even know how we got into this question. I forgot, but his background led to this in so many ways. He was a product of the university. Listen, it helped me tremendously that I had spent a lot of time on American campuses. And there was nothing that came out of that White House that you wouldn't hear on a liberal West Coast, East Coast, or Chicago campus.
I guess it's like you mentioned, like you said earlier, the generational difference was important as well. He was younger than his predecessors. And I guess also the shock to the system, to the Israeli system, that you'd had, although from different parties, you had, 16 years of Clinton and then Bush, of two, like pro-Israel to their bones.
We had Reagan.
And then Reagan, right, and Reagan.
We had Reagan.
Right. But yeah, interesting. So here's a contemporary question from Marty Weisberg. He asks whether you think that the US will pressure Israel to open the Palestinian consulate in Jerusalem, and how.
I don't think so. I don't think they can. I think that our political leaders, including those maybe who are center left, are saying to the United States, you do this, you're going to bring down my government. And you don't necessarily want the government's going to come after me. Fair
enough. So you mentioned, we mentioned in passing already the war, of course, in Russia and in Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Shmuel Yerushalmi asks whether you think or how you think the US's relationship could be impacted by both Russia and China, as the growth of China.
Well, these are huge questions, and they're two different questions, Russia and China. Okay. Russia is going to impact because I'm unconvinced at this stage that Russia can be defeated the way some people would like to see Russia defeated in the West. I come with a deeper, I think, understanding of Russia, having worked there and suffered there, frankly. And I don't think that Putin calculates his losses the way those losses would be calculated in the West. He's just going to keep going. I've been predicting that they're going to take Odessa, and they started shelling Odessa yesterday.
Right.
I think that's going to be the prize for him, controlling the coast and controlling Odessa. I think that I say this as someone who was critical of Israel's initial neutrality. I thought it was wrong morally. I thought it was wrong strategically. I thought it was short-sighted strategically. Even though what's going on with the Jewish agency now is troubling, even though we are the Jewish state, we're the Jewish democratic state. We're not just any state, and that obliges us. That obligates us to act in a certain way internationally. I felt that for a long way about many other issues as well, including our relationship with far-right parties in Europe. With Russia, I also felt that we were broadcasting fear unnecessarily around the Middle East. We were afraid that if we adopted something more robust than a neutral position on Ukraine, that the Russians wouldn't let us operate freely in the skies of Syria. Okay? And they've made a lot of noises about this in recent days. There are only 4,000 Russian soldiers in Syria, a couple of dozen aircraft. I don't think that the country that has an army that's more than twice as large as the British and French army combined should be broadcasting fear of that Russian force to our neighbors. That's A. B, the Russians have no desire to stop us from hitting the Iranians, because the last thing they want are the Iranians in Syria, because the Iranians in Syria are there for one purpose and one purpose only, and that's to drag Syria into war with us. And lastly, I don't think the Russians are going to be very quick to fire at our planes, because then we're going to have to destroy what they fired with and let the Russians try to sell those later, which is a big source of income for them. So this is why they're making a lot of noise. Why they're coming down so hard, the Jewish agencies, because they don't want to shoot at our planes in Syria. And
I don't think that's our major worry. I'm sure the Iranians are saying now, you want our drone planes, you've got to protect our guys in Syria. That's what they're saying. And we'll see how that plays out. China is a completely different story. China is not about projection of military power now. China has a different paradigm. China sends in the builders and the merchants first, and the army comes later. China, as I'm speaking to you now, is making a huge noise building the subway across the street from my house in Jaffa. It's building our northern port, our southern port. They say the crane is the national bird of Israel. About 40% of the cranes of this city have Chinese signs under them. I work out early in the morning. It looks like Shanghai. All the guys on bicycles and yellow helmets. That's China. China has built the largest naval base in Africa at the entrance to the Red Sea. It is projected to build bases on the Persian Gulf. My guess is they will be involved in rebuilding Syria at some point because nobody else can do it. We got China. We got China here, which is egressing at a time when America is withdrawing, which puts us in a very, very difficult bind. I have sat through meetings in 3 administrations where Republicans and Democrats alike have expressed extreme displeasure at our strengthening closer relations with China. And they've gone as far to tell us unequivocally that if we let the Chinese build our ports, the Sixth Fleet will not visit those ports.
Wow. Okay. That's yeah. I mean, I guess.
P.S. Paul, China has now surpassed the United States as our #1 trading partner.
Really? Wow. Okay.
How about them apples? Yeah.
Yeah. Indeed.
Huh?
Indeed. Okay. So, question. A sort of question on contemporary Israeli politics. So, Lauren Blatt asks, we're going to read this as it's written. She just says, would Yair Lapid be better able to get along with a Democrat president than Netanyahu? I guess the answer is probably yes. But first of all, you can tell me if you agree with that. But also, maybe we can expand on that and say, obviously, Netanyahu knows Biden and has known him for many, many years. So it doesn't necessarily mean that a return of Netanyahu would mean a return of the Bibi-Obama relationship, right?
No, I think it's very different. I do think they get along. They're friendly. I have many opportunities of being in the same room with them. They're of a certain generation. They've known each other since the time when Netanyahu was the charge d'affaires in Washington, going back to the early 80s. That's a long time. You have to distinguish between a potential relationship between a Prime Minister Netanyahu and a President Biden and a Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Democratic Party. And certainly certain wings of the Democratic Party, and particularly in the Democratic Party where there's a residual resentment over the 2015 speech, which was perceived not as a speech against the JCPOA as it was against the democratically elected and African-American president. Right. And big problems with the Black Caucus there. And it would take a tremendous amount of work. I have a close and long-standing relationship with the current ambassador, with Mike Herzog, and I'm sure he's working in that direction. Right. Okay. And our final question, which was a question that was asked actually quite near the beginning, but I left it till now, which is maybe you can tell us something about if you personally have any ambitions to return to politics, because I think a lot of people listening to you would appreciate your insight and your experience and your wisdom in the Israeli political arena. Okay, I'm laughing. You mentioned in passing I have another hat. I'm a writer, and I write fiction and nonfiction. My new fiction book is coming out in October. It's called Swan's War. Don't miss it. It's a whodunit. I'll be going on a major book tour for that. It's my 5th work of fiction, and I'm also now in the process of what can I say? Raising funds for my next nonfiction book, which I already have a contract for, from Random House, but my research has to be funded. I'm actually working with people who have worked with the Begin Center. I'm working with the Hidden Light Institute, who promoted the book on. Indeed, yes, I know them very well. What's the book? What's the book about? Can you tell us? I want to do the same thing for Israel's War of Independence that I did for the 67 War. Okay. But I must say that the 48 War is a immensely more important book. Like, man, keep in mind, what are they attacking today? They're not attacking the quote unquote occupation.
Right.
They're attacking our existence.
Right.
And we now have generations of especially young Jews in the world who are told that our country was created as an act of genocide and ethnic cleansing and oppression and colonialism and racism, and they have no book. There's just no, think of a book. We have a book that tells us how this country was created. Now, there are dozens of books to tell you how terrible this country was when it was created, but think of one. So I want to write that book, and I think that would be a very important thing for me to do in my life, in my career. But to do that, I'm working with the Hidden Light and other institutions to try to raise the funds.
Right.
My books are expensive. You have to do research around the world.
Indeed.
Not so easy. So that's, as for going back into politics, what can I say without sounding too smarmy or sentimental? My whole life has been about service to this place. Whether it was a volunteer in the kibbutz as a kid, or a lone soldier in the paratroopers, or working underground in the Soviet Union. Anytime I'm called to the flag, I'm going to be called to the flag. I will simply drop everything. And I did. I was a professor at Georgetown when they called me to be the ambassador.
Right.
And I was at IDC when they called me to be in Knesset. And I will always be called. And I will always, if I'm ever called, I will report very, very quickly for duty, because it is something that's very essential with me, the service to this country. It is apart from being a dad and now a granddad, I have 6 grandchildren. It is the proudest part of it.
Okay, well, that's a wonderful place to end. And I want to thank you very much for your time, for giving us your time and your insights and your experience. And again, please do read that book, Ally, but also his other wonderful history books and his fiction work. Let's plug that as well. And we look forward to the new book on 48, the important new book on 48. I want to thank everyone for joining us. If you're not on my mailing list, then email me, paulg@begincenter.org.il. I just wrote it in the chat to get on the mailing list. This was recorded. Someone asked about a recording of this. This will be up on YouTube. I will send the link out to my mailing list, and you can find it also just on the Begin Center YouTube channel. So thank you, everyone. Next Wednesday, not this coming Wednesday, the Wednesday after, we have Gabriela Shalev, former ambassador to the United Nations, on the Zoom as well. So thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Ambassador Michael Oren.
Good night, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Laila Tov. Bye.